It was a cold, foggy night when the call came in. A suspected break-in on Elm Street. My partner and I flicked on the siren and sped through the darkened streets, apprehensive about what we might find. When we arrived at the old Victorian house, the front door swung eerily on its hinges. I drew my flashlight with one hand and my gun with the other as we entered cautiously. The entryway was dim but undisturbed. Police were coming in, I announced loudly. No reply. We swept room by room, finding no signs of forced entry nor anything amiss until we came to a closed door leading to the cellar. I nodded to my partner, who swung open the door. A loud screech echoed up as a streak of gray fur darted past us and out of sight. Just a frightened cat, it seemed. I shone my light down the stairs. Anyone there? Still no answer. The cellar seemed empty, just some dust and cobwebs visible. But as I lowered my flashlight, a strange sight made my blood run cold. Scrawled on one wall, in what appeared to be dried blood, were the words, "Get out," over and over again. What on earth? My partner breathed. I ventured cautiously down the first few steps, keeping my gun aimed straight ahead. The dark basement held various decrepit pieces of furniture and some old trunks and boxes, but no signs of life. Still, a deep sense of unease washed over me. Something felt very wrong. We searched the house thoroughly, but found no intruders, nor anything to explain the chilling cellar message. I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched, though. We told the homeowner what we had found and said we would come back to investigate more, then retreated gratefully to the crisp night air outside. Back on patrol, an eerie fog had settled, muffling all the familiar nighttime sounds. As we drove slowly through the mist, I replayed the bizarre scene in my mind. What could it mean? My thoughts scattered when suddenly a dark figure darted out right in front of our car. I slammed the brakes just as the person turned toward us. For a split second in the headlight's beam, his face seemed to shift strangely. Then he was gone, vanished into the fog as quickly as he'd appeared. We jumped out to search the area thoroughly, but found nothing. Unease prickled over me. My partner met my eyes grimly. "Let's get back to the station," he muttered. I couldn't agree more. Later, in the safety of the station, we scoured through files of strange cases. People gone missing, past incidents at the house. The more I pieced together, the more a dark tale emerged of bizarre deaths and ghostly legends around the old Victorian house dating back more than a century. As the night wore on, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling of being watched from the shadowy corners of the station. Sleep felt impossible. Every small sound put me on edge as that night replayed over and over in my mind. Had that shifting face in the headlights been real or some strange trick of light and fog? Or had it been something unnatural? The next few nights on duty, I found myself avoiding Elm Street altogether. The whole area felt heavy with gloom. But one night when a call came in for a prowler just 2 streets over, I had no choice but to respond. As we neared the intersection by the old Victorian house, that prickling sense of eyes upon me returned. This time, I could swear I heard a whisper through the darkness calling my name. I forced my eyes to remain fixed straight ahead as we drove quickly past. I told myself it was all in my imagination, that there must be some rational explanation. But in my gut, I knew I had seen something terrible, dangerous, and not of this world. And now I feared it had noticed me too. My nights would never feel safe in darkness again. You never really get used to it. Seeing things on this job that shake you to your core. I've been a cop for over 20 years and have my fair share of chilling memories. But there's one case that haunts me to this day. It started out seeming routine, a missing persons call in a sleepy rural area just outside of town. Neighbors hadn't seen old Mrs. Jennings, the widow who lived alone down the road, in several days. They asked us to do a wellness check. My partner Frank and I drove out around dusk, joking about bothering this poor woman over nothing. When we pulled up to the small, ramshackle house, nothing seemed amiss, but knocking brought no answer. The door was unlocked, so we slowly entered, calling Mrs. Jennings' name. No reply came except the scurrying of rats down the hallway. Unease prickled my neck, and I drew my weapon just in case. Frank and I methodically cleared the few rooms of the decrepit old house. The peeling wallpaper and smell of must told a tale of nobody doing maintenance here in ages. Finally, we came to a closed door off the kitchen. Odd scraping sounds came from inside, heart pounding. I nodded to Frank, who carefully turned the knob. The stench hit me first, a powerful wave of decay and disease. As the door swung open, it revealed a den of true horror. There was no furniture, only mounds of trash rising to the ceiling. Rotting food, feces, and unidentifiable filth carpeted the floor. Every surface crawled with roaches and flies. The scraping sound came from an army of rats burrowing into piles, shredding newspaper and cardboard with abandon. But through the debris, I spied something even more chilling, a withered hand jutting out from under a tower of garbage. Reeling from the sights and smells, Frank and I slowly entered what could only be described as a death chamber. There was a path carved through the waste, and we followed it to the center. When the beam of my flashlight revealed the main pile, we saw her. Mrs. Jennings' lifeless body lay half submerged in waste. Her paper-thin skin was coated with sores and maggots. Scraps of clothing hung from her skeletal frame. Shocked, I stumbled back into what appeared to be a homemade altar of bizarre animal bones and decaying food scraps. Clearly, the old woman had been dead for some time, and for reasons I still don't understand, she chose to live her final days wallowing in refuse as some type of demented recluse. Even now, the image of her corpse festering there amid those hellish conditions haunts my restless nights. What possessed someone to degrade themselves this way? It was almost too much for my psyche to bear. We evacuated the home and called in hazmat teams to begin the gruesome process of reclaiming the body. As we finished taking statements, I noticed my hands shaking slightly, a police veteran unnerved. Frank put his hand on my shoulder, trying to make sense of it all through tired eyes. All these years later, neither of us have come to terms with the horrors we witnessed in that house. When people ask me about my most unsettling case, my mind immediately goes back to that fateful call. While police work exposes you to the worst of the human condition, I'll never understand what twisted impulse made that lonely old woman choose to surround herself with such nightmarish decay in her final days. The ravenous vermin, the stench of rot, her withered corpse claimed by true squalor. That sinister house of foulness still lingers like a virus in my mind, popping up in disturbed dreams. I doubt the chilling memory will ever fade. It was my 5th year on the force when I caught the case that still shakes me to my core. As a rookie, I thought I'd seen it all. The violence, the depravity, the depths of human cruelty. But I was wrong, and I'll never be able to forget it. It started with a missing persons call one Tuesday morning. A woman, Samantha Clark, age 32, had failed to show up to work 2 days straight. Her employer said it was completely out of character. Samantha was their most reliable employee and hadn't missed a day in over 3 years with the company. Her coworkers were worried something terrible had happened. I assured them we would look into it and try to locate Samantha. My partner, a 15-year veteran on the force named Bill, and I headed over to Samantha's apartment to investigate. We knocked on the door. No answer. The property manager let us in. The apartment seemed tidy at first glance. Nothing indicating a struggle or break-in, but no sign of Samantha either. We searched the place and found no clues until we opened the closet in the spare bedroom. And there she was, lying in a pool of blood and other bodily fluids, bound and gagged. She had been tortured viciously and was clearly dead, though the coroner later estimated only for 24 hours or so. We had just missed saving her. As we secured the scene, I had to excuse myself to vomit. Bill seemed shaken too. We'd both seen homicide scenes before, but this was savage on another level. Whoever had abducted and murdered Samantha was truly sinister and depraved. In the following weeks, The case consumed my every waking moment. Our forensics team combed every inch of Samantha's apartment, finding hair, skin cells, and even a fingerprint belonging to a Matthew Giles. When we ran Matthew's records, we found he had done time for assault, but had been out and off parole for 6 months. We brought Matthew in for intense questioning, hoping he would crack, but he refused to admit guilt, sticking firmly to his alibi that he had been out of state visiting family when Samantha was murdered. With no confession and not enough hard evidence, we had to cut Matthew loose. The captain warned me not to do anything rash, but I became obsessed. I knew in my gut Matthew had tortured and killed Samantha. I tailed him for weeks on my own time, until I discovered him preparing to skip town under an assumed name. Convinced I finally had him fleeing justice, I confronted Matthew at his hideout. At first he tried denying it, claiming he was just getting away for a while, but I refused to back down. Finally, he snapped. He confessed to killing her as if bragging, describing every horrific act of his with perverse joy. Then he attacked me. We struggled violently until I managed to get my gun on him. I still vividly remember staring down at Matthew's psychotic grin as I aimed at his chest. He seemed disappointed when I lowered my weapon and arrested him instead of shooting him dead. Bringing him to justice the right way was more important, I reminded myself. Still, part of me wishes I had killed him and saved the families from the painful trial. In my dreams, sometimes I did. Samantha's case has stuck with me after all these years. It reminds me that true evil walks among us, hiding behind seemingly normal faces. And try as we may, we can't always stop them in time. I became a cop wanting to help victims and punish the wicked. And yet now I often wonder, have we done enough? Were we done enough? Will we ever? Those doubts may never stop haunting me. It was a Tuesday night when the call came in. A suspected break-in on Victor Street, the third one this month. My partner and I headed out, not thinking much about it at first. We'd responded to so many calls just like it, but there was something different about this one. Something that still keeps me awake, some nights all these years later. As we pulled up to the small blue bungalow, nothing seemed amiss at first glance. The neighborhood was quiet, with residents tucked away in their homes for the night. But the front door swung wide open, the first sign of trouble. My hackles were up instantly. I told my partner to be on high alert. Guns drawn, we approached slowly. Clearing each room, we found nothing disturbed, no signs of ransacking or theft. The house laid out neatly, almost too neatly, aside from that open door, like something just strolled right in without a care in the world. An icy chill ran down my spine despite the heat of the summer night. Where were the homeowners? Heading toward the closed door at the end of the hall, my breath echoed loudly in my ears. I reached out, turned the knob, swung it open in one swift movement with my gun raised. Nothing. No one there. Only an immaculately made bed, as if no one had slept there in ages. Until we heard it, that low wail seeping through the walls. A cry from somewhere deep in the bowels of this ordinary little suburban home. We swept through the house again, looking for doors, hidden entrances, any sign of where that haunting sound originated from, coming up empty. Then I saw it. A seam in the living room wallpaper, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. I tore it open to reveal a door. The cry ceased instantly, as if it knew it had been found out. We scrambled to open the door, guns aimed ahead, demanding whoever was on the other side show themselves. Silence. Clicking on our flashlights, all we saw was a narrow staircase leading down into inky darkness. We had no choice but to descend into that abyss, our calls of police echoing into the shadows. The wooden steps creaked under our weight. The stench overwhelmed me first, that unmistakable smell of decay and death. I gagged but kept steady forward. At the bottom of the stairs, our flashlights revealed a small room. Makeshift was the only word for it, with a dirt floor and crude wooden shelves along the walls. And the far wall, that's when I saw her, or what remained of her, chained at the wrists and ankles against the wall, her body ravaged, naked except for those chains binding her. My hands trembled, flashlight beam wavering up and down her destroyed form. We got her down quickly, but it was too late. No life left in her glassy eyes. Rigor had set in some time ago. She'd clearly been there for at least a day or two, kept alive only by some sadistic whim of whoever did this to her. I scrambled back up the stairs, gagging and steadying myself against the wall as I radioed it in. Backup arrived along with crime scene analysts who would determine she was a college girl reported missing 5 days prior. We never caught the monster who committed this atrocity. He must have known we were coming and disappeared before we ever arrived. I scoured every inch of that house looking for who knows what. A hair, an article of clothing, a weapon even. Some shred of evidence that would lead us to her murderer. But the house had seemingly cleaned and sanitized itself by the time we uncovered that evil chamber below. I still drive by that house sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, hoping to see a light at night when I can't sleep, hoping to see a light on. Someone wandering by a window, wondering if that hidden room still remains undiscovered and what other secrets lurk there. We go about our lives never knowing what's happening right next door, oblivious to unimaginable horrors playing out while we eat our dinners and sleep soundly down the block. It's enough to make your mind play tricks, seeing monsters around every corner,